more speedily than normal on that snowy, windy, bitter night, I admit. It was December 23rd, 1970, and I suspect that there were other members of the club who did the same. Taxis were notoriously hard to come by in New York on stormy nights, so I called for a radio cab. I did this at 5:30 for an 8 o'clock pickup. My wife raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. I was under the canopy of the apartment building of East 58th Street, where Ellen and I had lived since 1946, by 7:45, and when the taxi was 5 minutes late, I found myself pacing up and down impatiently. The taxi arrived at 8:10, and I got in, too glad to be out of the wind to be as angry with the other driver as he possibly deserved. That wind, part of the cold front that had swept down from Canada the day before, meant business. It whistled and whined around the cab's window, occasionally drowning out the salsa on the driver's radio and rocking the big checker on its springs. Many of the stoves were open on the sidewalks that were nearly bare of last-minute shoppers. Those that were abroad looked uncomfortable or actually pained. It had been flurrying off and on all day, and now the snow began again, coming first in thin membranes, then twisting into cyclone shapes ahead of us in the street. Coming home that night, I would think about the combination of snow, the taxi, and the New York City with considerably greater unease. But I did not, of course, know that then. At the corner of 2nd and 40th, a large tinsel Christmas bell went floating through the intersection like a spirit. "Bad night," the cabbie said. "They'll have an extra 2 dozen in the morgue tomorrow. Wino popsicles, plus a few ladybag popsicles, I suppose." The cabbie ruminated. "Well, good riddance," he said finally. "Less welfare, right?" "Your Christmas spirit," I said, "is stunning in its width and depth." The cabbie ruminated. "You, one of those bleeding heart liberals," he said flatly. I refused to answer on the grounds that my answer might tend to incriminate me, I said. The cabbie gave a "why do I always get the Weisenhower" snort. But he shut up. He let me out at 2nd and 35th, and I walked halfway down the block to the club and bent over against the whistling wind, holding my hat on my head with one gloved hand. In almost no time at all, the life force seemed to have been driven deep into my body, a flickering blue flame about the size of a pilot light in a gas oven. At 7:30, a man feels the cold quicker and deeper. That man should be home in front of a fireplace, or at least in front of an electric heater. At 73, hot blood isn't even really a memory, it's more of an academic report. The latest flurry was letting up, but snow as dry as sand still beat into my face. I was glad to see that the steps leading up to the door of 249B had been sanded. That was Stephen's work, of course. Stevens knew the base alchemy of old age well enough. Not lead into gold, but bones into glass. When I think about such things, I believe that God probably thinks a great deal like Groucho Marx. Then Stevens was there holding the door open, and a moment later I was inside. Down the mahogany paneled hallway, through double doors standing 3/4 of the way open on their recessed tracks, into my library, cum reading room, cum bar. It was a dark room in which occasional pools of lighted gleamed reading lamps. A richer, more textured light glowed across the oak parquet floor, and I could hear the steady snap of birch logs in the huge fireplace. The heat radiated all the way across the room. Surely there is no welcome for a man or a woman that can equal a fire on the hearth. A paper rustled, a dry, slightly impatient sound. That would be Johansson with his Wall Street Journal. After 10 years, it was possible to recognize his presence simply by the way he read the stocks, amusing, and in a quiet way, amazing. Stevens helped us off with my overcoat, murmuring that it was still a dirty night. WCBS was now forecasting heavy snow before morning. I agreed that it was indeed a dirty night and looked back into that big, high-ceilinged room again. A dirty night, a roaring fire, and a ghost story. Did I say that at 73, hot blood is a thing of the past? Perhaps so. But I felt something warm in my chest at the thought. Something that hadn't been caused by the fire or Stephen's reliable, dignified welcome. I think it was because it was McCarran's turn to tell the tale. I'd been coming to Brownstone, which stands at 249B East 35th Street, for 10 years, coming at intervals that were almost, but not quite, regular. In my own mind, I think it as a gentleman's club, that amazing pre-glorious Steinheim antiquity. But even now, I'm not sure that's what it really is, or how it came to be in the first place. On the night, Emlyn McCarran told his story, the story of the breathing method. There were perhaps 13 club members in all, although only 6 of us had come out of that howling bitter night. I can remember years when there might have been as few as 8 full-time members, and others when there might have been at least 20, or perhaps even more. I suppose Stevens might know how it all came to be. One thing I am sure of is that Stevens had been there from the first, no matter how long that may be, and I believe Stevens to be older than he looks. Much, much older. He has a faint Brooklyn accent, but in spite of that, he is brutally correct, and as cuttingly punctuous as a third-generation English butler. His reserve is part of his often maddening charm, and Stephen's small smile is a locked and latched door. I've never seen any club records, if he keeps them. I've never gotten a receipt of dues. There are no dues. I've never been called by the club secretary. There is no club secretary, and at 249B East 35th, there are no phones. There is no box of white marbles and no black balls. And the club, if it is a club, has never had a name. I first came to the club, as I must continue to call it, as the great of George Waterhouse. Waterhouse headed the law firm for which I had worked since 1951. My progress upward in the firm, one of New York's 3 biggest, had been steady but extremely slow. I was a slogger, a mule for work, something of a center puncher, but I had no real flair or genius. I'd seen men who had become at the same time I had promoted in giant steps while only continued to pace, and I saw it with no real surprise. Waterhouse and I had exchanged pleasantries, attended the obligatory dinner put on by the firm each October, and had little more congress until the fall of 1960, when he dropped off by my office one day in early November. This in itself was unusual enough, and it had me thinking black thoughts, dismal, that were over-counterbalanced by giddy ones, an unexpected promotion. It was a puzzling visit. Waterhouse leaned in the doorway, his Phi Beta Kappa key gleaming mellowly on his vest and talking amiable generalities. None of what he said seemed to have any real substance or importance. I kept expecting him to finish the pleasantries and get down to the cases. Now about this Casey brief, or we've been asked to research the mayor's appointment of Sokowitz, too. But it seemed there were no cases. He glanced at his watch and said he had enjoyed our talk, and that he had to be going. I was still blinking and bewildered when he turned back and said casually, "There's a place where I go most Thursday nights. A sort of club. Old duffers mostly, but some of them are good company. They keep a really excellent cellar, if you have a palate. Every now and then, someone tells a good story. Why not come down some night, David, as my guest?" I stammered some reply. Even now, I'm not sure what it was. I was bewildered by the offer. It was a spur-of-the-moment sound, but there was nothing spur-of-the-moment about his blue Anglo-Saxon eyes under the bushy white whorls of the eyebrows. And if I don't remember exactly how I replied, it was because I felt suddenly sure that his offer, vague and puzzling as it was, had been exactly the specific I had kept expecting him to get down to. Ellen's reaction that evening was one of amused exasperation. I had been with Waterhouse, Carden, Lawton, Fraser, and Effingham for something like 15 years, and it was clear enough that I could not expect to rise much above the mid-level position I now held. It was her idea that this was the firm's coefficient substitute for a gold watch. Old men telling war stories and playing poker, she said. A night of that, and you're supposed to be happy in the reading library until they pension you off, I suppose. Oh, I put 2 packs on ice for you. And she kissed me warmly. I suppose she had seen something on my face. God knows she's good at reading me after all these years we've spent together. Nothing happened over a course of weeks, when my mind turned to Waterhouse's odd offer. Certainly odd, coming from a man whom I met less than a dozen times a year, and whom I only saw socially at perhaps 3 parties a year, including the company party in October. I supposed that I had been mistaken about the expression in his eyes, that he really had made the offer casually, and simply forgotten it. Or, regretted it. Ouch. And then he approached me one late afternoon, a man of nearly 70 who was still broad-shouldered and athletic-looking. I was shrugging on my topcoat with my briefcase between my feet. He said, if he'd still like to have a drink at the club, why not come tonight? Well, Good. He slapped the slip of paper into my hand. Here's the address. He was waiting for me at the foot of the steps that evening, and Stevens held the door for us. The wine was excellent, as Waterhouse had promised. He made no attempt whatsoever to introduce me around. I took that for snobbery, but later recanted the idea. But 2 or 3 of them introduced themselves to me. One of those who did so was Emmeline McCarran. Even then, in his late 60s, he held out his hand, and I clasped it briefly. His skin was dry, leathery, tough, almost turtle-like. He asked me if I played bridge. I said I did not. Damned good thing, he said. The damned game had done more in this century to kill intelligent after-dinner conversation than anything else I can think of. And with that pronouncement, he walked away into the murk of the library, where shelves of books went up apparently to infinity. I looked around for Waterhouse, but he had disappeared. Feeling a little uncomfortable and a lot out of place, I wandered over to the fireplace. I believe I have already mentioned, a huge fan of fireplaces. It seemed to be particularly huge in New York, where apartment dwellers such as myself have trouble imagining such a benevolence big enough to do anything more than popcorn or toast bread. The fireplace at 249B East 35th was big enough to broil an ox whole. There was no mantel. Instead, a brawny stone arch curved over it. This arch was broken in the center by a keystone which jutted out slightly. It was on the level of my eyes, and although the light was dim, I could read the legend engraved on the stone with no trouble. It is the tale, not he, who tells it. Here we go, David, Waterhouse said from my elbow, and I jumped. He hadn't deserted me after all, and only trudged off into some uncharted locale to bring back drinks. Scotch and soda's yours, isn't it? Yes, thank you, Mr. Waterhouse. George, he said. Here, it's just George. George, then, I said, although it seemed slightly mad to be using his first name. What is all of... Cheers, he said. We drank. Stevens tends the bar. He makes fine drinks. He likes to say it's small, but a vital skill. The scotch took the edge off my feelings of disorientation and awkwardness. The edge, but the feelings themselves remained. I'd spent nearly half an hour gazing into my closet and wondering what to wear. I had finally settled on a pair of dark slacks and a rough tweed jacket that almost matched them, hoping I would not be wandering into a group of men, either turned out in tuxedos or wearing blue jeans and LL Bean lumberjack shirts. It seemed that I hadn't gone too far wrong on the matter of dress anyway. A new place and a new situation make one crucially aware of every social act, no matter how small. And at that moment, drink in hand and the obligatory small toast made, I wanted very much to be sure I hadn't overlooked any of the amenities. Is there a guest book I ought to sign? I asked. Something like that. He looked mildly surprised. We don't have anything like that, he said. At least I don't think we do. He glanced around the dim, quiet room. Johansson rattled his Wall Street journal. I see Stevens passing the doorway at the far end of the room, ghostly in his white mess jacket. George put his drinks on the end table and tossed a fresh log onto the fire. Sparks corkscrewed up the back throat of the chimney. What does that mean? I asked, pointing at the inscription on the keystone. Any idea? Waterhouse read it carefully as if for the first time. It is the tale, not he who tells it. I suppose I have an idea, he said. You may too, if you should come back. Yes, I should say, you may have an idea or two, in time. Enjoy yourself, David. He walked away, and although it may seem odd, having been left to sink or swim in such an unfamiliar situation, I did enjoy myself. For one thing, I have always loved books, and there was a trove of interesting ones to examine here. I walked slowly along the shelves, examining the spines as best I could in the faint light, pulling one out now and then, and pausing once to look out a narrow window at the 2nd Avenue intersection of the street. I stood there and watched through the frost-rimmed glass as the traffic light at the intersection cycled from red to green to amber and back to red again, and quite suddenly I felt the queerest and yet very welcome sense of peace come to me. It did not flood in. Instead, it seemed almost to steal in. Oh yes, I can hear you saying. That makes great sense. Watching a stop-and-go light gives everyone a sense of peace. All right, it made no sense. I grant you that. But the feeling was there just the same. It made me think for the first time in years of the winter nights in the Wisconsin's farmhouse I grew up in, lying in bed in a drafty upstairs room and marking the contrast between the whistle of the January wind outside, drifting snow as dry as sand along the miles of snow fence, and the warmth my body created under 2 quilts. There were some law books, but they were pretty damn strange. 20 cases of dismemberment and their outcomes under British law is one title I remember. Pet cases was another. I opened that one, and sure enough, it was a scholarly legal tome dealing with the law's treatment, American law this time, of cases which bore in some important respect upon pets. Everything from house cats that had inherited great sums of money to an ocelot that had broken its chain and seriously injured a postman. There was a set of Dickens, a set of Defoe, a nearly endless set of Trollope, and there was also a set of novels. 11 of them, by a man named Edward Gray Seville. They were bound in handsome green leather, and the name of the firm, gold-stamped on the spine, was Stedham and Son. I never heard of Seville or his publishers. The copyright date of the first Seville, There Were Our Brothers, was 1911. The date of the last, Breakers, was 1935. 2 shelves from the Seville novels was a large folio volume which contained careful step-by-step plans for erector set enthusiasts. Next to it was another folio volume which featured famous scenes from famous movies. Each of these pictures filled 1 whole page, and opposite each, filling the facing pages, were Freever's poems, either about the scenes with which they were paired or inspired by. Not a very remarkable concept, but the poets were represented, and remarkable. Robert Frost, Marianne Moore, William Carlos Williams, Wallace Stevens, Louis Zukowski, and Eric Young, to mention just a few. Halfway through the book, I found a poem by Algernon Williams set next to that famous photograph of Marilyn Monroe standing on the subway grating and trying to hold her skirt down. The poem was entitled The Toll, and it began, "The shape of the skirt is, we would say, the shape of a bell. The legs are the clapper."